be covering Chapter 1, which is the Introduction to Operations and Supply Chain Management. And in this case, in this particular lecture, we will cover the following topics. We'll talk about what is operations management, why study operations management as a business major, what are the operations, how it is viewed as a transformation process in business organizations. Also, we'll focus on the operations function and the interaction with other departmental areas. Then we move on to looking at responsibilities of operations supply chain managers and look at a brief history evolution of operations management function. And in terms of globalization and competitiveness and how over time it had implications for operations management. Then we move on to the topic of strategy and operations, and which we detail in strategy formulation and planning. Then we wrap up the area with looking at various operations management trend and objectives, and then various learning objectives for the remainder of the course. Okay. When we look at operations management, it is defined as the design, operation, and improvement of systems to create and supply firm's primary product and services per the demand of firm customers. So what we're really trying to focus on is why companies produce the product, and it is to cater to the needs of the customer. Operation function consists of all activities that are, and this is important, directly related to the production of goods and services. So we are focusing in this course on all activities that are directly impacting or related to production of goods or creation of services. And in this case, it specifically involves with the management of direct resources in this case. We need money for all the activities within the company, but what are the things that are needed for direct production of goods and services? And those are referred to as 5 Ps. And these are people. So we need workers as well as management who are put together as one of the Ps, people, to create the goods and services. Then we also need the facility known as plants. So in this case, what we are trying to have is a place where we actually create the goods and services. Then we need parts, major ingredients that are needed, the raw material, the sub-assemblies, which are needed to put together a product or create a service. Then also, in some cases, as appropriate, we need processes, which could be take the shape of machines, or it could be some forms that have to be filled out for a service so that the final output can be created. And finally, the 5th P is planning and control, the actual policies of the company that will allow them to decide on whether or not to provide overtime, whether or not to, how much inventory to carry, what should be the level of quality they should have, etc. Now, those are the 5 Ps. All of these are direct resources for creation of goods and services, which are under the purview of operations management area. So let's move on to the next topic as to why study operations management. And in this case, operations management happens to be one of the 3 functional areas which are critical for creation of goods and services. Every other area is secondary to these 3 departments. So one of them is, of course, operations that we are talking about. We need to produce goods and services so that customers find value in buying our output. And as a result, they are able to pay more than what the sum of ingredients is worth by itself because of the value it provides them. Besides the operations area, you have the finance. You need to have the initial startup capital, have the money to buy the ingredients, have the money to pay the rent for the place, need to have the money, capital to rent the space, as well as buy the raw material and pay the wages of the worker. And then finally, you also have one of the third area is the critical area is marketing, which is needed to create the necessary demand to advertise the type of product or services that we are offering, and so that customers can contact the company and purchase their goods and services. And also, as appropriate, offer advice before and after the product is produced about what different things they would like in the future or with the current improvements that can be offered in this existing product. So in this case, of all these three areas, operations happens to be a costly part of the organization. This is where the most of the expenses are used up. So in this case, besides that, and I'll talk about that in a bit, operations also addresses the mismatch between supply and demand, because as you have more demand than supply, one can easily create more product to cater to this additional demand. Or if you have less supply, less demand than supply, then one can try to use operations policies to maybe stock excess product in an inventory warehouse for a later date, or somehow revise the product in terms of new features that can be added and new efficiencies that can be created by improving the process so that the new product appeals more to the customers and thereby increasing the demand. It also is critical for profitability and survival of a company, because one of the main reasons why companies exist is to produce products and services which add value to the customer. So as long as we offer customers value, we are able to survive for another day to compete in this marketplace. Operations management also helps us understand goods and how goods and services are produced, and that we'll be profiling in the next few chapters, and then we'll be focusing on what operations managers do in this case. What we're going to do is look at how operations add value or increase value in contribution to a business bottom line. So in this case, what we're looking at is the current baseline example, and then we'll try to look into how marketing option adds value, how finance and accounting adds value, and then finally how operations add value. Okay. So in this case, I've added some numbers so you can see. Let's start with the current baseline. A hypothetical company that makes $100,000 in sales, and in this case, we assume the cost of goods sold, which is how much the money is needed to actually buy the raw material, pay the wages, pay the rent of the place where the production is being done. All the various costs that are paid for, those cost of goods sold is $80,000. So when you subtract that, we have ourselves a gross margin of $20,000. Okay, and assuming we took out a loan to fund this operation, this business, in this case, the finance cost is $6,000. And that leaves us with a remainder of $14,000. And from that, we have to pay taxes. Let's assume a hypothetical number of 25% taxes, and that is $3,500. When netted, you're left with a contribution of $10,500, which I'm sure there are other factors such as depreciation and everything, but that remains constant for everything else. That will be taken out proportionally, so we'll just leave everything out, just looking at a very simplistic example of a company. Now let's look at marketing option. What value does a marketing function adds to it? So we are looking at a very improbable, the maximum one can expect is, let's say we get somebody to go out and really drum up business so that the sales revenue increases by 50%. Is it possible? Sure, it is possible over a year. Is it possible year after year? More than likely it's not. But let's assume that is the case, that we have a bumper year, a banner year in terms of sales. So instead of 100,000, now we have 150,000 in sales. The proportional cost of goods sold, which seems to be 80% over here, will be for 150,000 will be $120,000. That leaves us with a gross margin of 30,000, and from that, if you subtract the finance cost, which is the same because we did not take any more loan in this case, same $6,000 subtracted, which leaves you a total of $24,000. From that, taxes at 25%, that's 6,000 subtracted, and remainder is 18,000 contribution. So you're looking at an increase of about $7,500 by just using the marketing lever in this case. Now let's look at the equivalent, going back to the baseline and now trying to see what is the best scenario, best case scenario, what finance or accounting option offers to this picture. So in this case, even if we assume we hired a Wall Street whiz kid who can come and restructure our current loan, refinance that, and somehow get us a better loan option. And let's say we assume that finance cost is reduced, finance cost by 50%. So in this case, you have the same $100,000 sales figure, nothing changed over here, which gives you a cost of goods sold of 80,000. We have the gross margin of 20,000. Now our finance cost is down by 50%, so instead of 6,000, we have 3,000. So that gives you a subtotal of 17,000. Taxes at 25% reduces that value by 4,250, and you are now have a new contribution number, which is 12,750, which is about 2,250 above the original contribution. So in this case, finance has a lot less wiggle room in terms of adding contribution as compared to marketing. Let's look at the operations management option. Again, in this case, going back to the finance option, you may be able to reduce your restructure your debt maybe one time to 50% low, but you can't do that year after year after year. So there is limitation to such a scenario, even if it is possible. Let's look at the operations management option. So in this case, now we are actually looking at a target which is much more realistic, not some highly improbable target of increasing sales revenue by 50% or reducing finance cost by 50%. We are only looking at reduction of production costs just by 20%, which many companies have been able to do much more than that by outsourcing to China or identifying better design of a product so that less material is needed, or trying to find better machines so that the time taken to produce the product is smaller, and so on and so forth. So there are various ways to realize this final option. So in this case, looking at a $100,000 sale, but the cost of goods sold has gone down by 20%, which is basically most of it is operations cost. So that 80% less 20% is 64. So this is 100,000 minus 64 gives you 36,000 gross margin. Take out the finance cost of 6,000, that leaves you with $30,000 dollars, and taxes as 25%, that's $7,500. And that brings our contribution to well over 100% of the original, which is $22,500 now, and compared to this, that's about $12,000 increase. much more than either marketing or finance option. So one of the key nuggets of wisdom that comes out of this analysis is the operations cost comprises of the bulk of what is the cost of selling a product. So cost of goods sold is typically for manufactured goods, even for services, it is considerable. And because of that, you are looking at, if we can figure out a way to reduce that, it is definitely improves the bottom line. So that's why studying operations management is important as a business major. Now let's go ahead and look at where the operations management jobs are. So they are related in Silicon Valley area. They are in technology, how companies can identify better technologies to produce the products, so focusing on the process side, or you can focus on the place side, facility, space utilization, applying just-in-time management techniques to reduce the inventory that is not needed. Strategic issues, we'll talk about that in chapter 2. We'll look into that in strategic issues, which we'll talk about that in later part of this chapter. Response time, how the companies can improve the time to market. Those are other factors that also are integral in addressing, we address those in supply chain area. Then people team development, which is typically addressed in quality management aspect, which we'll talk about in chapter 2 we'll also look into customer service, which is operations management for services area, as well as quality, cost reduction. Other jobs are in inventory reduction, as I mentioned earlier, as well as productivity improvement. So given this, operations is basically now can be viewed as a transformation process. And in this case, you can see operations, which typically is a system that transforms inputs into outputs that are of greater value. So in this case, the transformation process that you see is you have the inputs, which can be material, machine, people, management, capital, which could be not just the dollars, but other resources. All of that put together into this system that we have in the company of taking all of this and producing goods and services, that transformation process and outcome goods and services. And this is being done through a control mechanism of feedback, constant control feedback and requirement that is offered in here. In terms of transformation process in operations, it can take a variety of ways. It can be physical transformation, which is a lot of us understand, which is actually the physical properties of a raw material changes. When you take milk, add yeast in it, you make it into yogurt, if you will, and that's the physical transformation. You can take water, put it in the freezer, and make ice out of it. Those are the physical properties that are changing. And in this case, typical manufacturing operations will address the physical transformation. Now, other type of operations that we have are transportation and warehouse operation, which allow for locational transformation. That is, an item that is available in place A is now available in place B, because a product that is made in China a few weeks ago is now available in US for sale, and that's where the value is higher, and so that's where the customers are. Then retail operations focus on the exchange transformation. A product that was owned by the store is now has changed hands by providing the money. Now the customer has ownership of that product. Then you have warehousing operation, which is storage transformation. And in this case, what has happened is a product that is available in time A can be stored for availability at a later time, at time B, if you will. This typically is a case when students, when they go home during the holidays, they want to leave their belongings in a storage place so that those items will be available at their disposal when they come back to start the semester in fall. Physiological healthcare operations handle the physical health well-being of a patient. So that's where the transformation is happening. A person who is suffering from some ailment becomes well after going through healthcare operation, after being seen by the nurse, then accordingly sent to see a doctor or get an x-ray or take the proper medications, things along those lines. And psychological transformation is when you go through the experience economy, whether it's entertainment, go watch a movie, and have the services provided to you at the movie theater, or see a show, or a circus, or any other type of service like in a restaurant, not just eating food, but good ambiance, good camaraderie among friends, and that maybe can go a long way to lift somebody's mood, if you will. Taking a cruise with family and friends, those will be all examples of psychological transformation. And then finally, telecommunication operations address the information transformation. Information that is available to one person now is available to anybody. Anybody can go and share their video on YouTube, or what is on their mind, they can share it with their friends and followers on Twitter, or create their own blog spot where they can share their blogs with the rest of the world on internet. So those are informational transformation in this case. Now, in terms of operations function interaction, you can see we talked about interaction or operation with marketing. In this case, marketing and operations interact to address whether a product or service is available. So marketing can accordingly tell the customer of the availability of the product and the price of it, and also get back to operations on the upcoming demand of the same product. Then we look into lead time estimates as to how long will it take to get the product ready if the customer needs it, which is the information coming from marketing, and operations can give that feedback. Status of the order or delivery schedules. Then also marketing provides this information back on sales forecast, how many customers' orders they have booked, customer feedback, whether a customer likes the product or not, as well as promotions. What is the acceptance of promotion if customers like a certain promotion or they don't like as much. In terms of finance and accounting, you're looking at the operations receives the following information from a finance accounting area: budgets, how much budget they have to run their department, cost analysis of various type of raw material that is being used for production of goods and services, capital investment, maybe there is a new acquisition scheduled for new machines or a new warehouse that operations can take into account. Stockholder requirements as to what needs to be produced, because that's what our stockholders expect, a new model by the end of the year or improvements in the current products. Now, in terms of operations, what information operations provide to finance and accounting, you're looking at production and inventory data. That way they can update their books on what is the value of the products. Also, capital budgeting request, if they would like to get a new machine purchased or hire new people, they need to get the requisition approved from finance accounting area to see if the funds are there to make this happen. Capacity expansion and technology plans, for example, if they need a long-term acquisition of a new space to expand the current operation facility, etc., that will be going under that category. In terms of interaction with suppliers, outside suppliers, you're looking at outside suppliers will provide the following information to operations department: material availability, quality data of what type of product they can produce and at what quality, delivery schedules, as well as the design that they can accommodate in their production of raw material sub-assemblies, if you will. And then operation will provide the following information to supplier: order for material, what they would want for their own internal production, production and delivery schedules, when they need that raw material, what are the quality requirements they expect from the supplier, and what are the specific design and performance specs that you have. In terms of human resources, to round up the list, operations will let human resources know about the personnel needs, how many more people do they require, what type of skill sets they need, performance evaluation. Supervisors in operations department can evaluate various operation people working under them and give that information to HR so that accordingly they can offer bonuses, promotions, hiring of additional people, or firing of the people who are doing an inadequate job. Then also specific job design, a particular job, what will it actually take, and then how do you measure whether the person has given their 100% in an 8-hour shift, if you will. Coming back from HR, operations will find out how many people were hired and fired. Training-wise, how many people are now qualified to do certain type of tasks. Legal requirements, what is allowed and what's not allowed within the law. That is, every 8-hour shift needs to incorporate a half an hour lunch, if you will, and every 4 hours, I believe, you have to have 15-minute break. So those will be examples of some of the legal requirements, or OSHA's legal requirement. Those will be all coming under this. And what union allows and doesn't allow in this case. Now, in terms of the various responsibilities of operations managers, that is, in this particular case, they are involved in planning activities, which could be specific, whether long-term or medium-term or short-term. Long-term includes capacity planning. If we have enough capacity, or do we need to increase more capacity of production? Location-wise, is this the right place to produce items, or do we need to move somewhere, increase the space that we have, or we need to move to a smaller space that we don't need that much? What type of products and services they should be producing, and should they be making it in-house, or should they be outsourcing it, buying it from somebody else? What type of layout of the production process should be there, so that is the machines all in one line, like an assembly operation, or is it a U-shaped line, or is it free form of where items come and go, depending on what type of layout we have? What type of new projects are they undertaking, which are never been done within the company, or how do they schedule various people on various machines to make a specific type of product? Then besides that, they have control of inventory as well as quality that is handled by operations managers. In terms of organizing, they focus on the degree of centralization. How many items have to be decided on a central basis, or versus how much they can delegate to the lower level supervisors, which they can do on their own. So the amount of centralization or decentralization. Then issue of subcontracting, that also to outside vendors, is another item in purview of operations managers. Then we look into staffing area, where this is the interaction with HR in terms of hiring, layoff, and use of overtime. And then also specific managerial duties require directing. As a director, they need to offer certain incentives to their workers so that they can give the 100%, or even some at times more than 100%. Issuance of work order, who gets to do what, and what type of specific job assignments there will be. Now, in terms of evolution of operations management and supply chain management, initially in earlier times, started out with a craft production. Most of the product were produced by hands, handicraft products and services for individual customer, where workmanship was more important. One product produced by artisan, just for a particular customer, if you will, everything done by hand. And then later on came the concept of division of labor, where workers realized that they can work much faster by focusing on doing repetitive tasks, that is, doing the same thing over and over again, and thereby taking advantage of learning curve opportunities. So one person doing only one type of activity and doing it quickly without error. So that's where the division of labor came in. So take a task, a longer task, and break it down into smaller tasks, so that, and divide that series of tasks among various people, and as a result, it much quicker assembly operation that is created. Interchangeable part was another concept that was created, where standardization of parts being used. Most of the students end up using 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. That is a standard in USA. So that allows that paper to be used in any type of folder or in a binder, if you will. And so that's the interchangeability part example. So once you have standardization of parts, that made it easier to use as replacement parts, if you will, enabled mass production in this case. Scientific management concept allowed for systematic analysis of work methods, so that you could see where how in what specific activity was time being lost, or what was being done with efficient use of time. And so accordingly, time motion studies allowed scientists to actually revise the work in a way that it actually kept people healthy in terms of not doing work in conditions where they actually are hurting their backs, etc., as well as being more productive for a longer period of time, if you will. Mass production, this is where high volume production, a lot of it was through automation, standardized products for a mass market. So one product being produced, but in huge quantity. That's where the mass production line came in. And then over time, moving on to lean production, which is taking the concept of mass production, but focus more now on quality and flexibility. And one can even take this further into green production, which is the current focus in the recent year or two on sustainability, which is how to produce products without compromising the environment or social responsibility. One of the things, so we'll look into in terms of various aspects, events that happen in industrial, various eras. I'll start with Industrial Revolution. You can see some of the things that are important. In this case, is the division of labor that came in, as well as the interchangeable part, which happened in 1776 and 1790. And those, after that, in scientific management era, which started in early 20th century, the aspects of principle of scientific management and time and motion study, and then other key operations tools that were created, activity scheduling chart as to who will be working on what machine, etc., so that we are not having any confusion on that aspect. That came by Gantt, which is one of the cornerstones of project management even to this day, this Gantt chart. The moving assembly line, Henry Ford's Ford Model T, the first car in production, mass production, that was created back in 1913. Moving on to in era of human relations, Hawthorne studies were focusing on how as well as the motivational methods, how to improve methods so that people are willing to work more than 100%, as well as offer they are not bored or demotivated at work. So avoid those type of scenarios. Okay, and then in operations management area, which offered a lot of tools for operations, operations research, which offered a lot of tools for operations management area, more notably linear programming, which students cover in quantitative business analysis courses, digital computers that were coming in the middle of 20th century, and then various focus on simulation, waiting line theory, queuing theories, which is something which is used by telecommunication industry. AT&T, Bell Labs was among the various companies that actually created a lot of patents in this area. Decision theory, PERT, CPM, project management, which came out of Department of Navy. So you have a lot of these tools that were created. Then moving on to MRP, material requirement planning, which we basically cover in later chapters of this course, electronic data interchange, etc. So you can, a lot of them, computer integrated manufacturing, all of them actually often from the operations research area in late 60s and 70s. Then moving on to quality revolution, which is where America took note of the quality, high-level quality that Japan was offering in their products and services, and as a result, that became a really popular concept to be embraced by the US industry. So just in time, back in 1970, which was created at Toyota by Taiichi Ohno, and then followed with the TQM, which Deming basically spearheaded when he went to Japan. And moving on to how quality was integrated into strategy and operations, as well as re-engineering concept, which Campy and Hammer offered in 1990s, and then Six Sigma, which came from Motorola, also coming in the mid-1990s. Then Internet revolution in 1990s and 2000 offered us not just the infrastructure to have telecommunication with anybody around the world, but World Wide Web, enterprise resource planning, so that all the tracking of orders, payments, etc., could be used through enterprise information system that was created. Supply chain management information tools were created at that time. E-commerce, business to business, not just the business to consumer, but business to business, were also part of the early 2000s in this case. And then globalization with the concept of Thomas Friedman's world is flat. There is a whole emphasis on global supply chain. European Union may address coming into prominence, the concept of outsourcing and service science becoming more important. And finally, in today's day and age, focus on green revolution, focusing on Kyoto Protocol, global warming issues, corporate social responsibility coming into play. So this is pretty much how, over time, things have turned out. Where they are headed, one has to at least know where we are coming from and know about the various operations tools that are at our disposal so that we are better prepared to do things in the future. Now let's move on to the supply chain area. Just the supply chain management, taking the various inputs, whether they are coming from the supplier, being transformed in the manufacturing site, and distributed through wholesalers and out to retailers to the end consumer. So it's a management of the flow of information, products, and services across a network of customers, various enterprises, and supply chain partners. So you are actually looking at a flow of information, products, services, including money as well. So why study supply chain management? Well, one of the key things that we have established earlier is operations management department has a lot of interdependencies with other departments. So same way, a business enterprise has interdependence with other enterprises, which could be the supply chain partners, the suppliers, the customers, the wholesalers, the retailers, etc. So it is important to know how well we are managing our supply chain so that everybody in the supply chain, including the company itself, continues to offer value to the customer, thereby ensuring profitability and competitiveness for time to come. It's all about the almighty dollar. If you don't manage your supply chain well, there will be money wasted. You may end up producing a product that is no longer required by the customer, or you end up producing product but it's available at the wrong place, not at the location where the customers want it, but at some other location. Or it is coming at a different price or at a different time and maybe has perished in the meanwhile. Perishability issue may come in. So leverage supply chain, managing supply chain allows you to leverage the capabilities of all your suppliers. If you have the supplier network behind you, you can offer more value to the customer by offering them the capacity of products that they seek, because you know your suppliers can handle the increased workload and that is being offered by the customer. It is the new challenge where managing relationship with supply chain partner is the next frontier. Managing that well is the next challenge once a company does a good job of managing internal departmental interdependencies. And then it offers a wealth of opportunities for companies like Walmart or Dell to actually create value, even though they themselves are not producing the product, but it's how they offer the right product at the right place, at the right price, at the right time, and to the right customer. Now, in terms of the next aspect we'll focus on is globalization. Why companies go global? Well, in this case, it is because of favorable cost issues. A lot of times it's reduced labor cost, taxes, tariffs. So companies try to seek global customers as well as global suppliers to reduce their cost to produce the products. Also, it provides access to international markets, which improves their supply chain as well as creates a new set of customers available to them, plus provide better goods and services to the customers. Response to change in demand. So as the US customers' demand goes down, when a company is involved in a global supply chain, they can easily redirect their product to somewhere, some other parts of the world where the demand continues to rise, thereby identifying, if the demand changes in one area, it can easily be compensated by looking at some other areas as well. Reliable sources of supply, that is, if one area is strife with war or some sort of natural disaster, earthquake or floods, and thereby the supply of raw material is not possible on a temporary basis, with a global supply chain, companies can easily find or seek suppliers in other parts of the world which are unaffected by the same natural disasters or internal political matters, if you will. Understanding the markets, by being involved in a global marketplace, companies actually get a better job of understanding who their customers are, who their suppliers are, what type of product and services will they prefer, and accordingly learn from that. Learn to improve operations with the latest trends and technologies, because learning from all around the world, you take the best practices and incorporate that in your companies in this case. And also, another important aspect, as we mentioned earlier, operations and HR have this important linkage of hiring and training employees so that they can do operations job well. Now, with globalization, you have access to a global talent who can easily offer the right set of tools as well as competencies to produce the products and services. It also offers you the necessary training and culture and perspectives, which can be different across various nations, but by globalizing, companies become much more indoctrinated in variety of cultures and cognizant of how to address those differences in those cases. Increased globalization results from internet and falling trading barriers as well. As companies open their products to the rest of the world, as well as seek to buy raw material as well as get supplies from all over the world, they actually can definitely take part in this globalization phenomena. Global strategies, you can see there are some examples of various companies that are doing things. In terms of Boeing, sales and productions are worldwide. It doesn't just sell in the US, it sells all over the world. United Colors of Benetton moves inventory from store around the world faster than its competition by building flexibility into design, production, and distribution. So again, that's where their competency is. Sony purchases components from suppliers in Thailand, Malaysia, and around the world, even though it's a company that is headquartered in Japan. And then sales typically, among other places, is in the United States. Volvo, even though it's considered a Swedish company, it's controlled by American company Ford. The current, and I think it's probably sold back to Sweden in recent years. So these exchange of hands keep happening. The current Volvo S40 is built in Belgium and shares a platform with Mazda 3 as example when Mazda was part of Ford, and which is built in Japan. So you could see a lot of synergies that are created when ownership changes hands in this case. Here is a Chinese company which has increased their market share substantially without actually getting on the radar of many people. They produces refrigerators and actually has about 33% of the US market, if not more. And also create refrigerated wine cabinets and the dorm room refrigerators, if many people may have come across. They actually have 50% of the market share in that category. And then they produce those in South Carolina in this case. Now in terms of, you can see how over time hourly compensation changes depending on which part of the world you are. If you think of United States, hourly compensation on average is about $24.50, which if you are in Norway, you're looking at about $49, almost double. And if you're in Sri Lanka, you're looking at about 61 cents in terms of hourly wage. So that's one of the reasons for companies seeking to outsource, to reduce that wage and to capitalize on the wage differential that they can find. In terms of GDP per capita, while is per capita, United States is $45,000 on average. India is at $2,800. So that's one of the reasons where companies find incentives to take advantage of such discrepancy in purchasing power as well as buying supplies and getting services done. In terms of trade of good percentage of GDP, China actually has about 2/3 of their GDP from trade in goods, whereas United States, they actually only amount to 23% of their GDP is coming from trades and goods. The rest of it is coming from services in terms of how important services are in this case. In terms of productivity and competitiveness, concept of competitiveness is a degree to which nation can produce goods and services to meet and test the international markets. So in this case, how well we do as compared to the rest of the world in producing goods and services at a certain price, of a certain quality, if you will. And if we do a better job, then our product will be preferred over somebody else's product. So productivity, which is strictly a ratio of outputs over inputs. So that's just looking at another name for that is efficiency. And then output is just the sales, a number of sales that are made or products that are produced, something to measure the output by customers served, meals delivered, calls answered. In terms of input, which is the second part of the denominator of productivity, is labor hours, investment in equipment, how much dollars you spend in buying the machine, how much material you used for every shirt you're producing, or square footage, etc., of warehouse space that is used to carry inventory. So in terms of measures of productivity, you could have a single factor measure of productivity, which could be labor productivity, output over labor, or it could be material productivity, which is output over materials, or capital productivity, which is output over dollars invested. Or you could have a multi-factor productivity, which is output divided by labor plus material plus overhead, or something else, which is output over labor plus energy plus capital. So multi-factor, as long as it doesn't take into account all the possible factors, it's a multi-factor productivity. So in this case, total factor productivity is all the goods and services produced, all the outputs divided by all the inputs. So in this case, productivity is a measure of process improvement. How well are we doing our job? Represents output relative to input, and only through productivity increases can the standard of living improve. So let's take an example of that. And in this particular case, let's see if I can show you. You have, in this example, we are assuming 10,000 units are produced, sold at $10 a unit, 500 labor hours, and labor rate is $9 an hour, okay? And cost of raw material is $5,000, and cost of purchased material is $25,000. So in this case, labor productivity can be calculated by taking output divided by labor input, okay? And multi-factor productivity could be taking all the output divided by all the various inputs that are provided in here. So what I've done is now let's just put in the numbers so we can see how the labor productivity is calculated. As I mentioned earlier, we take the output, which is 10,000 units produced, and divide by the labor input. So you have 10,000 units divided by, in this case, 500 labor hours. So 500 hours, which comes out to 20 units per hour. So labor productivity is each hour of labor generates 20 units. Or you can arrive at a unitless figure. Right now, the units are units per hour, but we can change that into everything, convert everything into dollars. We know we can sell each unit for $10 a unit. So this becomes 10,000 units times $10 a unit, which is $100,000, which is generated in output. And how much did it cost us to provide 500 hours of labor? The labor rate is $9 an hour, so that's $500 divided by 9, times $9 an hour, which gives you $4,500. So $100,000 of output divided by $4,500 of labor gives you 22.22. In this case, it's a unitless number because dollars divided by dollars leaves us with unitless number. So the advantages and disadvantages of both these approaches, calculating 20 units per hour versus 22.22. In this case, the advantage of the first number is it's intuitive. You can easily tell somebody that labor productivity is 20 units per hour, and it's easy to understand where one can see for each hour of labor, you are generating 20 units is being produced. But the advantage of the second one, although it's not very intuitive, is this is the common frame of reference. Everything in this case has been translated into dollars, numbers. So the value of labor rate, even if it were to increase later on, you can still be able to compare that with this number, versus it will be hard to compare that because this only has partial information. It doesn't tell us, the first unit does not, first approach does not tell us what is the cost of selling the units and what is the cost at which you bought a labor hour. So in the second one, you have incorporated, it's much richer but less intuitive approach of calculating labor productivity. In terms of multi-factor productivity, you have output divided by labor plus material. Those are material you have is in raw material as well as purchased material. In this case, notice that the material cost is always given in dollars. Because of that, you have to use dollars in the labor in order to be able to add them. And then dollars divided by dollar will give you another unit nest number. So you have the $10,000 of output, and this is $4,500 of labor plus $5,000 of raw material and $25,000 of purchased material. Add at the denominator, and this will give you $34,500. And once divided that from 100,000 gives you a multi-factor productivity of 2.90. How we actually interpret this is for every dollar of labor and material that is invested in this operation, we are able to generate $2.90 of output. So that's the closest concept that we can, interpretation we can arrive at. Now, looking at measuring productivity, in this case, there are certain problems with productivity measures because it emphasizes efficiency over effectiveness. Because the focus is how much can be produced from the given amount of input. One never questions whether that output is of value or not. It's assumed it's of value. So a lot of times companies are pushed to produce the most they can to get the maximum efficiencies out of a particular operations process without realizing that it is, if it's actually adding value to the overall company or not. Now, in terms of, in this case, you could be producing the wrong items, something that is produced because to keep your efficiency numbers up, but they cannot be sold. Wrong quantity, loss of focus, loss of flexibility of 100% utilization. When you use your machines and workers to 100%, you cannot take advantage of any last-minute opportunity that comes your way, which offers you even more money. So a lot of times that's what happens. It may also ignore other means of adding value, in this case, quality, flexibility, timeliness that you have. Costly and time-consuming to collect. This is a very expensive measure to collect as a company. How to improve productivity? In this case, there are various ways to improve this measure. Automation, substitute equipment for human labor. Technology can be used to invent new ways of doing things so that instead of producing 20 products an hour, 20 units an hour, maybe new machines can be designed that can produce double the productivity. Employee training, so workers can work smarter, cross-training, so they can figure out better ways of doing things. Better work practices, how they can do the work better or through learning, etc. So let's look at productivity growth, and in this case, notice that in terms of productivity numbers, you can see Korea, United States, Norway, Belgium, UK, all are being labeled as countries where productivity actually increased. But whereas Germany, Japan, Taiwan, France, and other countries in this second category is where the productivity actually declined. But this number by itself doesn't tell the whole thing, because one has to investigate further. And in this case, if you look at the second part, you'll notice that Korea actually they used a lot less input. Their inputs increased by almost 2%, but their outputs increased by a lot more than 2%, close to 3%. And that's where the productivity increases happen. Whereas in case of United States, even though it is listed, if you go back and look at United States is also listed at the same amount of productivity growth, but it achieved in a different way, which is by reducing both their outputs and inputs. So their outputs actually reduced, but their inputs reduced even by a lot more. So the numerator decreased, but the denominator decreased by even further. So that's where the productivity increase is happening. Whereas if you look at Norway, that is actually increasing their output more, relatively more than their input in this case. In terms of Singapore, their output is decreasing, but their input is increasing. Now, one can easily argue that these numbers do not tell the whole thing. Maybe they are increasing their input, but they are producing higher value products, if you will, or deciding to add value in various other services that are not captured in this particular case. But again, in this case, one has to look at both, since it's a ratio, the output divided by input, to see how these numbers move on. And so this wraps up the first part of Chapter 1, and in the next part, we'll focus on the strategy aspects and operations and the linkages between that. Thank you.